Hello everybody, my name is Mario5514 and welcome back to another Splatoon Talk video. In this video we're going to be looking at some more what-if patch notes for Splatoon 3 for patch 10.1. With Drizzle season 2025 officially upon us, this will possibly be the last video I will do covering 10.1 before the update, which will come out possibly by next week. Keep in mind these are only what-ifs of what we would like to see instead of what Nintendo will give us. And if you end up liking the video, consider subscribing and let's get started. So, as usual, we have our legend. Any letters that are in green is a buff, yellow is a rework, and red is a nerf. With the confusion aside, let's get started. First up are changes to the 96 gal. So for all three weapons, we're going to decrease its ink consumption from 2.3 to 2.1%, give it 3 more shots on a full tank before it has to refill. We're going to decrease its angle deviation when jumping from 11.3511 degrees to 10 degrees. Increase the player's movement speed by 10% from 0.04 units to 0.05 units. And then we're going to increase its droplet rate from 3.4 to 4. So I think 96 gal would benefit a lot with these changes. And of course, with its droplet rate being its nerf getting reverted from Splatoon 2, I think 96 gal would be able to paint more effectively. Not to mention with its RNG being buffed, specifically its jump RNG, I think these changes would make 96 gal more usable. Though I think it's more of a niche weapon in certain comps that you would see 96 gal being run. Though I think these changes would make it get pushed outside of being a niche. Alright, next up are changes to Splatter Shot. So for all three weapons, we're going to decrease its ink consumption from 0.92% to 0.9%. So the ink consumption nerf we got in Splatoon 2 is now completely reverted. We're going to decrease its angle deviation when on the ground from 4.86 degrees to 4 degrees. Small change there. We're going to decrease its angle deviation when jumping from 11.66 degrees to 10 degrees, and then increase its droplet rate from 1.5 to 2. So another droplet rate nerf getting reverted, not just on 96 gal, but also on Splatter Shot. I think Splatter Shot would benefit a lot with these changes, and I think that's all that Shot's going to get here. Alright, next up are changes to Splashmatic. So for all three weapons, we're going to increase its shot velocity from 15.815 units to 15.83 units per frame. So I think reverting the nerf that I got in Splatoon 2 would be nice. And of course, increasing its ink consumption from 0.8 to 1.2% is definitely something that a lot of people would want to see on it, given that it has not been given that ink consumption nerf for more than 2 years now. And then we're going to increase the player's movement speed by 8% from 0.072 units to 0.08 units. I think Splash would be more toned back, as well as it could still be used with the other two buffs, aside from the ink consumption nerf. Alright, next up are changes to Rapid Blaster. So for both weapons, we're going to decrease its ink consumption from 7 to 6%. We're going to increase the player's movement speed by 10% from 0.055 units to 0.065 units. And then decrease its angle deviation when jumping from 8 degrees to 6 degrees. I think the jump RNG is the real issue for blasters, so I think making it more accurate when jumping is definitely the best thing, though you're still going to be running at least one main of Intensify action to mitigate the jump RNG, though it's slowly going to be less gear dependent on Intensify action. So this would be a step in the right direction for it. Alright, next up are changes to ballpoint splatling. So for both weapons, we're going to decrease its angle deviation when on the ground in its long range mode from 1.5 degrees to 0.75 degrees. We're going to increase its short range damage from 28 to 30, so it's consistent with its long range mode. And then increase the effective run speed up from 25 to 30%. And then finally, decrease its angle deviation when jumping from 4 degrees to 2.5 degrees. I think ballpoint would benefit a lot with these changes, given that Inkjet is not very good at the moment. Not to mention that InkVac is not good either, though I think the main weapon is going to feel a lot better with these changes in the long term. Alright, next up are changes to the H3 nozzle nose. So for all three weapons, we're going to increase the player's movement speed by 50% from 0.06 units to 0.12 units. We're going to increase its droplet rate from 3 to 4, another droplet rate nerf from Splatoon 2 getting reverted. We're going to increase its effective range from 115 units to 120 units. Its total range will not be affected, just its effective range. And then we're going to decrease its ink consumption from 2.08 to 1.6%. So the ink consumption nerf that I got in Splatoon 2, that I got twice, is now completely reverted. So I think H3 nozzle nose is going to feel a lot better with these changes, given that H3 has some solid kits. It's just a main weapon problem. So I think H3 is going to feel a lot better after these changes if they were to happen. All right, next up are changes to Range Blaster. So for both weapons, we're going to decrease its ink consumption from 11% to 10%, decrease its angle deviation when jumping from 8 degrees to 6 degrees, decrease its frame cooldown before refilling from 70 frames to 60 frames, and then increase its blast radius from 3.3 to 3.4 units. I think having a weapon that does not paint very well as has a very slow firing rate and is very ink hungry, have a bigger blast radius. Do you think it could have happen? I think the answer is yes, because I think with Range Blaster being a very high-risk weapon, you would want it to have a very high reward. You want it to have high rewards. So I think having its blast radius at 3.4 units is definitely incentivizing people to use it more. Not to mention it also increases the reward value out of it. So I think these would benefit a lot for it. Yeah. Anyway, next up are changes to Dually Squelchers. So for all three weapons, we're going to increase its damage from 28 to 30. We're going to decrease its ink consumption when dodge rolling from 8% to 6%, so it has more ink to use in turret mode. And then we're going to decrease its angle deviation when on the ground from 4 degrees to 2 degrees. I think the RNG and the damage buff is really going to help Dually Squelchers, given that the Embers models do not have any good output with screen, given that they 2 shots deals 56, screen does 40, and you're left at 96. So I think with the 30 damage buff, it's going to make them more usable, and they're going to make them more of a 2-shot than a 3-shot. So I think these changes are going to work a lot for the Dually Squelchers players. All right, next up are changes to Squeezer. So for both weapons, we're going to increase its burst fire damage from 38 to 40. We're going to decrease its angle deviation when on the ground in its painting mode from 8 degrees to 6 degrees. And then increase the player's movement speed when pressing ZR by 2%, from 0.066 units to 0.068 units. I think the change is going to make Squeezer a little more usable, slightly reverting the nerf that I got in 9.0, though we're not going to push it back up to what I had prior to 9.0, given that it was very oppressive and the nerfs were there for a reason. Though I think slightly reverting it to a point where it's still good is a good idea. I think anything higher than 0.07 units is definitely going to be pushing it over. So I think 0.068 units is going to be fine, like max. All right, next up are changes to Mini Splatling. So for all three weapons, we're going to decrease its angle deviation when on the ground from 4 degrees to 2.5 degrees. We're going to increase its droplet rate from 1.6 to 1.7. Another droplet rate nerf that's going to be slightly reverted from Splatoon 2. And then we're going to increase the player's movement speed when charging by 4%, from 0.072 units to 0.076 units. So Mini Splatling is going to be moving a little faster when it's charging as much as it's firing. So I think these changes are going to help Mini Splatling a lot, especially Zimmy, given that it's another popular weapon people still use in comps, as well as with the Barazuchi model, given that it's still a competitor to Splattershot with its Zuka output. All right, next up are changes to the 52 gal. So I think 3 changes we're going to give it are very straightforward and simple. So we're going to decrease its angle deviation when on the ground from 6 degrees to 4 degrees. We're going to increase its droplet rate from 2.4 to 2.5, slightly reverting the nerf that it got in Splatoon 2, which is all that it's going to get. And then finally, decrease its angle deviation when jumping from 12 degrees to 10 degrees. I think 52 gal struggles with the RNG, and I think making the RNG more bearable is a step in the right direction for 52 gal. I think any other changes besides these are just going to it's just going to make people hate the weapon even more. So I think these changes are going to be bearable for a lot of people. All right, next up are changes to the Rapid Blaster Pro. So for all 3 weapons, we're going to decrease its angle deviation when jumping from 8 degrees to 6 degrees, increase its splash damage from 35 to 40, and then increase the player's movement speed by 15%, from 0.05 units to 0.065 units. I think Rapid Blaster Pro is going to benefit a lot from these changes, especially with the RNG buff and with its splash damage buff, given that the Barazuchi model is the new cooler weapon, and with these changes, it's going to make it more powerful in certain comps, as well as in double cooler comps when it's paired with Zap. So I think these changes are going to push it even higher and could be another good competitor to Pencil. All right, next up are changes to the Tetra Dualies. So for both weapons, we're going to decrease its angle deviation when on the ground from 7.4 degrees to 5 degrees, increase its damage from 28 to 30. So for Dark Tetra Dualies, it's going to be beneficial for it, given that the blast radius on Reef Slider does 70, and with Tetra dealing 30, it's going to make Tetra Dualies a one-shot. And then we're going to increase the player's movement speed by roughly more than 9%. So yeah, it's more than 10%, by 13%, from 0.072 units to 0.085 units. So it's going to be moving faster than it is right now, outside of doing a dodge roll. So I think these changes are going to make it more usable. All right, next up are changes to Sloshing Machine. So we're going to decrease its interval between continuous swings from 38 frames to 36 frames, decrease its ink consumption from 9.2 to 8.6%, and then increase its movement speed by 10% from 0.07 units to 0.08 units. I think the movement speed nerf it got in Splatoon 2 is unnecessary, so we're going to revert that. So I think for both of these weapons, they're going to be more usable. They're going to see a little more in the long term. Not to mention they're going to be more bearable for people to use, given that regular machine was just gutted going into 4.0. So I think these changes are going to make them more bearable. All right, next up are changes to Heavy Splatling. So for both weapons, we're going to decrease its angle deviation when on the ground from 3.3 degrees to 2.75 degrees. We're going to increase the player's movement speed when charging from 0.062 units to 0.07 units, so by 8%. And then increase the player's movement speed when firing will be increased by 15%, from 0.07 units to 0.085 units. I think Heavy is going to benefit a lot with these changes, even though it's more of a kit problem than it is with the main weapon problem. Though these changes are going to make Heavy more usable in the long term, as well as it could push Heavy outside of being a niche, though Heavy Splatling is still going to be the niche weapon in certain situations. All right, next up are changes to Tri-Slosher. For all three weapons, we're going to increase its effective range when jumping from 10.45 units to 10.7 units. We're going to increase the player's movement speed from 0.066 units to 0.072 units, and then decrease its ink consumption from 6% to 5%. So Tri-Slosher is going to have like 2 to 3 more sloshes, maybe 4 more on a full tank before it has to refill. So that's a nice change, and I think Tri-Slosher is good from here on out. All right, next up are changes to Splabrella and Cerellabrella. So for both weapons, we're going to increase its max damage from 81 to 90, meaning that its pellet damage is going to be increased from 16.2 to 18, given that 5 pellets, 18 of the pellets, 18 damage pellets, which are 5 of them in total, 18 plus times the 5 pellets that deal 18 damage equals 90 damage. We're going to decrease its ink consumption from 5.5% to 4.5%, and then decrease its canopy regeneration time from 5.5 seconds to 4.5 seconds. So Splabrella and Cerellabrella are going to see a lot more use after these, though I doubt they're going to be used anytime soon, especially with Inkjet being not very good and Triple Ink Strike just being random on Brella. All right, next up are changes to Dynamo Roller. So for all three weapons, we're going to decrease its ink consumption from 18% to 16%, providing 2 more flicks before having to refill. We're going to increase the central zone where it's possible to splat an opponent when performing a horizontal flick by 10%, and increase its paint output when performing a horizontal flick by 8%, so it will cover up more of the gaps or holes that it has when performing a horizontal. So I think it's going to try to mitigate that pain with Dynamo Roller. All right, next up are changes to Splattershot Pro. For all three weapons, we're going to increase its droplet rate from 2 to 3, so it's going to be painting more consistently. We're going to increase its bullet velocity from 23 units to 24.75 units per frame. We're going to increase its effective damage from 115 to 120 units. Its total range is still going to be unaffected. And then we're going to decrease its angle deviation when jumping from 6 degrees to 4 degrees. I think Splattershot Pro is going to be more usable after this, given that Forge Pro and the Barazuchi model are going to be the big winners from it. I think the regular Pro is still going to be used, though I think Angle Shooter still sucks on it. Though these changes are going to make Pro more usable in the long term, aside from being like only picked in certain comps. All right, next up are changes to Glugadoolies. So for both weapons, we're going to decrease its angle deviation when on the ground from 8 degrees to 6 degrees, decrease its ink consumption when rolling from 8% to 6%, and then decrease its angle deviation after rolling from 3 degrees to 2 degrees. I think Glugadoolies are going to benefit a lot from these changes, and it could definitely push them outside of being like niche weapons. All right, next up are changes to the Undercover Brella. So for all three weapons, we're going to increase its damage from 40 to 45. We're going to increase its canopy HP from 200 to 250, decrease the time to regenerate its canopy from 3.7 seconds to 3.5 seconds, and then increase the number of pellets it'll fire from 7 to 9. So undercover is going to have more damage as well as more paint output to use in the long term. Alright, next up are changes to the Dread Ringer. So for all three weapons, we're going to increase the player's movement speed by 15% from 0.04 units to 0.055 units. We're going to increase its ink consumption from 9% to 9.4%, and then decrease the amount of time it takes to refill your ink tank from 50 to 45 frames. So basically it's lighting, so it's going to take 5 frames shorter to refill its ink tank after sloshing the weapon. So I think these changes are going to make Dread Ringer more usable, though reining in its power at the same time. Alright, next up are changes to Pencil. So Pencil is going to be getting nothing but nerfs here. So we're going to decrease the width of spray droplets from 2 units to 1.8 units, and then decrease its shot distance at a full charge from 27.77 units to 25 units. I think this is going to deal a big blow to Pencil, though we're just going to have to wait and see how these nerfs are going to affect it. Will this push it down a little bit more? Yes. I think anything beyond this is just going to make it drop off even more. I think this is going to drop off a little bit more, though it's not going to go straight to the bottom. So I think these changes are going to rein it in more and more. Alright, next up are changes to the NZAPs for both the NZAP 85 and 89. So for both weapons, we're going to decrease its angle deviation when on the ground from 4.75 degrees to 4 degrees, decrease its angle deviation when jumping from 12 degrees to 10 degrees, and then increase its droplet rate from 1.4 to 1.5, slightly reverting the nerf that I got in Splatoon 2. I think Zap would benefit a lot with these changes, and I think in the long term, NZAP 85 is going to feel a lot better with them in the long term. And with its RNG being better, I think Zap is going to be a better weapon in running Cooler or a Super Chump, though there are other weapons that can compete with that, though I think Zap is still the best competitor with the being a mobile Cooler weapon or just having the paint output and ink efficiency to get a whole lot of Super Chumps. Alright, next up are changes to Blaster. So for all three weapons, we're going to decrease its angle deviation when jumping from 10 degrees to 8 degrees. We're going to decrease its ink consumption from 10% to 9%, and then increase the player's movement speed by 10% from 0.045 units to 0.055 units. I think Blaster is going to feel a lot better with these changes, given with the RNG buff we're giving it. And it's also going to be more usable besides being in certain niche situations, being with Blaster being used in like Tower Control or Rainmaker, Custom Blaster being used in Splat Zones, as well as with the Embers Blaster being used in any kind of situation. So I think it will push these three farther up the list of being outside of pushing it outside of being a niche weapon. Alright, next up are changes to Splattershot Nova. As for both weapons, we're going to increase its damage from 24 to 26. We're going to decrease its angle deviation when on the ground from 5.5 degrees to 3 degrees, and then decrease its angle deviation when jumping from 8 degrees to 6 degrees. I think Nova is going to feel a lot better with these changes, as well as being more of a 4-shot than a 5-shot, though people are still going to they're still not going to run Nova anytime soon. But I think it's going to feel a lot better for anyone who likes running this weapon, or any of these weapons. Alright, next up are changes to Luda Blaster. So for both weapons, we're going to increase the player's movement speed by 15% from 0.05 units to 0.065 units. We're going to decrease its angle deviation when jumping from 6 degrees to 4 degrees, and then increase its shot velocity from 0.8484 units to 0.088 units. So I think Luda Blaster's shots are going to come out a little faster, though it's still going to feel slightly slow, though it's still faster than regular Blaster. So I think with these changes, it's going to make it more usable in the long term. Alright, next up are changes to Heavy Edit Splatling. So first up, we're going to increase its damage from 26 to 28, so it's more of a consistent 4-shot or 5-shot. We're going to increase the player's movement speed when charging by 4% from 0.072 units to 0.076 units, and then decrease the amount of time it takes to charge the second circle from 120 frames to 90 frames, so it's not going to have as much downtime when trying to go for a full charge, so it could just charge it up quickly and just go right into the battlefield. So Heavy Edit is going to feel a lot better with this change, as well as with Heavy Edit Nouveau. Alright, next up are changes to Splatana Stamper. So for all three weapons, we're just going to decrease its ink consumption when performing a charge attack from 11.7 to just 11%. Given that Stamper's high difficulty is there for a reason, and of course, with its ink consumption being very high. I think giving a slight buff is going to make Stamper more usable, though it's still going to be a very high difficulty weapon with a very high skill rating and skill floor. So I think this is a change in the right direction to make Stamper not as gear dependent as it is right now. Though you'll still be running at least a main of Inksaver main to try to mitigate its ink consumption. And then finally, our changes to the Reflux 450. All right, for all three weapons, we're going to decrease its ink consumption on a full charge from 6.5% to 6%, and then decrease its ink consumption on the first charge, basically for the full circle, from 4.68% to 4.5%. I think Reflux is going to get these changes and that's it. I think that's all that they're going to get. And from here on out, it's just going to be normal here. All right, now on to the sub-weapon changes. So first up is Burst Bomb. We're just going to decrease its ink consumption from 45 to 40%. Given that Splash's ink consumption is nerfed, the trade-off here would be that Burst would go back to being 40%. Because I think 45 is just kind of ridiculous, given that Nintendo they nerfed it to try to reduce Splash's top-tier status, though it did not do anything, as it was an indirect nerf to all the other Burst Bomb weapons. So I think with the 40% ink consumption, it's going to indirectly buff like Carbon Roller Deco, S-Blast 91, and Splatana Stamper as well. So I think this change would benefit a lot outside of Splash's purview. All right, next up are changes to Ink Mine. First up, we're going to decrease its ink consumption from 60 to 50%, reverting the nerf that it got in Splatoon 2, which reverted the buff that it got in Splatoon 1. So we're basically playing tug-of-war with the devs. And then we're going to increase its tracking time when the ink mine explodes from 5 seconds to 2.5 seconds to 7.5 seconds. So the tracking is going to last a little longer, though you're going to be running a little bit more of sub-resistance up to try to reduce the tracking time from ink mine, like with Point Sensor. All right, next up are changes to Squid Beacon. So first up, we're going to decrease its ink consumption from 75 to 70%, and we're also going to buff it so that we're going to increase the amount of times players can jump to a Squid Beacon if they don't have them equipped, from jumping to it twice to just 3 times. So Squid Beacon's going to last a little longer in this case here, which I think is nice. All right, next up are changes to Auto Bomb. So we're going to increase its enemy detection radius from 12.5 units to 13.5 units, and then we're going to increase its damage radius when exploding by 7%, and then increase its splash damage from 30 to 40. So it's going to be more consistent with other mains or other subs, or even other specials in that matter. Next up are changes to Sprinkler. We're going to decrease its ink consumption from 60 to 50%, which is going to help like Dynamo Roller, Blobber, or any other weapon that has Sprinkler. And then increase its high power duration from 8 seconds to 12 seconds, so it's going to last a little longer than usual. So that's a nice change there, so it's going to be painting a little more. So yeah, I think Sprinkler is going to benefit a lot with these changes. And then finally, our changes to Splash Wall. We're going to increase its base duration from 6.67 seconds to 7 seconds. We're going to decrease its ink consumption from 60 to 55%, and then increase its damage per half second from 30 to 35, slightly reverting the nerf that it got in Splatoon 2. So I think Splash Wall is going to benefit a lot with these changes, and with 52-gallon Squeezer, going to be a lot better with these changes, given that Wall is just a bit ink hungry on them, especially for Squeezer. So I think Wall being 5% cheaper is going to help it a lot, given with its ink consumption where it is currently. All right, now on to the special changes. First up is Trizuka. Its splash damage will be increased from 53 to 60, where it's for basically its inner hitbox. Its minimum splash damage, which is its outer hitbox, is being increased from 35 to 40. Its base duration is being increased from 5.5 to 6.5 seconds. And then we're going to increase the damage dealt to Big Bubbler by 35% of what it was before. So Zuka is going to be a little stronger towards Big Bubbler than it was back in 8.1, where it got the nerf. We're going to increase its startup from 20 to 25 frames, and then we're going to rework Trizuka, where you have the ability to use your sub-weapon when using the special. So if you have Splat Bomb, Burst Bomb, Suction Bomb, Ink Mine, Point Sensor, or Curling Bomb, you are now able to use those subs when Trizuka is deployed. If you have Splash Wall or Squid Beacon, you have to put those down before you can deploy Zuka. So yeah, that's the kind of trade-off here, is to not put Zuka over the edge here. All right, next up are changes to Tri-Strike, or Triple Ink Strike. We're going to increase its base duration by 30 frames from 6 seconds to 6.5 seconds. We're going to rework it so that you have the ability to submerge when using the special, like if you're using Trizuka. And then we're going to decrease its damage radius from 7.7 units to 7.5 units. So its damage radius is not going to be as big. All right, next up are changes to Tacticooler. So first up, we're going to decrease its cooldown by 60 frames from 10 seconds to 9 seconds. So it's now going to have a 9-second cooldown, which is nice. We're also going to rework Tacticooler, where after 3 seconds, the stand will disappear after all drinks have been taken to reduce visual clutter. So after all drinks have been taken from the cooler will disappear after 3 seconds to reduce visual clutter, so people don't have to focus on the cooler as much. As well as it reduces the how should I put it? So people who have to use cooler a lot more strategically, not to mention it's going to make their screens more empty a bit. And then we're going to increase the drink's effect from 17 to 18 seconds, so it's going to last a second longer, which I think is nice, given that there have been times where the drink wears off at the wrong time, and then you just get splatted and you just respawn at like 3 or 4 seconds later. So I think with these changes, it's going to make Cooler more usable in the long term. All right, next up are changes to Super Chump, as we're going to increase its HP per chump from 60 to 80. Its cooldown or base duration is being decreased by 90 frames from 10.5 seconds to 9 seconds. We're going to decrease the amount of time between falling and exploding by 30 frames from 3.5 seconds to 3 seconds. So your opponents will not have as much time to destroy the chumps before they explode. And then we're going to increase the number of chumps launched from 12 to 14. So they're going to have more chumps to deal with than where we are right now. All right, next up are changes to Inkjet. We're going to increase its strafe speed by 10%. We're going to increase its base duration by 30 frames, reverting the nerf that I got in Splatoon 2. We're going to increase its explosion radius that deals 50 damage from 2.55 units to 2.75 units. And then we're going to increase the damage to Big Bubbler by direct shots and explosions by 35% of what it was before. So, like Trizuka, Inkjet's getting the same buff here. So it's a mutual buff between Jetpack and Zuka. So I think these changes are going to make both Inkjet and Trizuka more usable, as well as being a counter. Even though they're still going to be countered by Big Bubbler, they're going to deal a little more damage towards Big Bubbler, which is nice. All right, next up are changes to Kraken Royale. So we're going to increase its movement speed from 11.52 units a second to 12.25 units a second. So it's going to be moving faster than it was starting in 5.1. We're going to increase its 60 damage radius by 25%, so the jump attacks are going to be more threatening. We're going to decrease its startup from 60 to 55 frames, so it's going to be 5 frames faster, though you'll still have that moment of vulnerability where people can still attack you. And now, if you use a shooter, a roller, slosher, brush, if you use dualies, umbrella, or splatana, you'll deal 5% less knockback to the special. For the rest of the weapons, which are chargers, blasters, splatlings, and tri-stringers, you will deal 5% more knockback to Kraken. So I think these changes are going to make Kraken more usable, as well as push it up more from being middle of the road, though I think B+ is where it's going to be. So I think a B tier is still going to be where Kraken's going to stay. Alright, next up are changes to tent missiles. So we're going to increase its explosion radius, which deals 30 damage from 4.25 units to 4.5 units. We're going to increase its explosion radius, which deals 50 damage from 2.1 units to 2.3 units. And then we're going to decrease its base duration or its cooldown by 60 frames from 10 seconds to 9 seconds. I think a 9-second cooldown on missiles is not bad, given that 10 seconds is kind of atrocious. Even though it's still not going to be a spammer, it's going to make missiles a lot more effective, or it's going to make them feel better, unlike the Barazuchi Splattershot Pro, Flings Roller, Splatana Wiper Deco, and Reflux 450. Alright, next up is a change to Ultra Stamp, which we're just going to increase its duration by 30 frames, slightly reverting the nerf that I got in 4.0, which was random and unnecessary. Alright, next up are changes to Splatter Color Screen. We're going to rework screens so that you don't have to hear the audio as much, so decrease the audio when you're holding the special before you throw it. We're going to increase its damage towards the Rainmaker Shield and Splash Wall from 3 times to 6 times the amount of damage. But we're also going to decrease its duration by 60 frames from 12 seconds to 11 seconds. So it's not going to linger around as much than where it is right now. So, which is nice. And then finally is our changes to Triple Splashdown. So we're going to increase the HP for both the Ink Fists from 100 to 150, so they're going to be a little more tankier, which means you'll have to work a little harder in trying to destroy them. And then we're going to decrease the amount of time it takes for the player in Ink Fist to start dropping after rising. So basically when you go into the air and then hit the floor, it's going to be decreased by 5 frames, from 60 to 55 frames. So it's going to be slightly faster, which means you got to be fast enough to take out the player before the fist hit the floor. So I think that's a nice change for triple splashdown. Alright, for the points for special changes, 96 Gal Deco will get 200p, reverting the nerf that I got in 3.1. Ember Splatter Shot and Splashmatic will get plus 10 points for special, lowering their output of Crab and Kraken, which is nice. Rapid Blaster Deco and Ballpoint will get 200p, increasing their inkjet output. H3D will get 190p, increasing its bubbler output. Range Blaster and CRB are getting 200p, increasing their output of Kraken and Wavebreaker. Custom Dually Squelchers will get 200p, reverting the nerf that I got in 5.1 because of Koshian and Turf War. Squeezer will get 210, increasing its Zuka output, in which, with Zuka being toned back, I think Squeezer could go back to 210 like it had after 5.1, prior to 7.2. Foil Squeezer will be 200p, increasing its screen output, and the Barazuchi Mini Splatling will be 200p, lowering its Zuka output, so it's more controlled. Rapid Blaster Pro Deco will be 180p, increasing its Killer Whale output, reverting the nerf that it got in 4.1, which was unnecessary. The Barazuchi Rapid Blaster Pro will be 190p, finally putting it in a position where it can see the most use in the meta. Light Tetradualies will get 180p, increasing its Zipcaster output. Sloshing Machine will get 210, increasing its Booyah Bomb output, making it more usable. Heavy Splatling Deco will get 190p, increasing its Kraken output. Tri-Slosher Nouveau will get 200p, increasing its cooler output, reverting one of the nerfs that it got between 4.1 and 6.1 because of Koshian and Turf War. Barazuchi Tri-Slosher will get 190p, lowering its screen output. Splabrella will get Tri-Strike at 190p. Glugadoolies Deco will get Zuka at 180p. Dreadringer will get 200p, lowering its Reef Slider output. Dreadringer D will get 180p, increasing its wave output. NZAP 85 will get 190p, increasing its cooler output, which is nice. The Anaki Splattershot Nova will get 200p, increasing its inkjet output. Heavy Edit Nouveau will get 200p, increasing its crab output. And Ember Splatana Stamper will get 200p, lowering its Booyah Bomb output. And finally, the Barazuchi Reflux 450 will get 210, lowering its Booyah Bomb output. And then for the stage reworks, we're just going to rework Urchin Underpass. So we're going to slightly change the terrain in Tower Control, Clan Blitz, and Turf War to increase routes and options for strategic points. We're also going to add, so the block that you saw in Splatoon 1 for Tower Control, that block will be added in for Tower Control, as well as that block will be for Clan Blitz as well. So you have some kind of retake or other strategic options that you have aside from where it is right now. So I think Clan Blitz is going to be a little better, and Tower Control is going to feel a lot better with the change. I think Turf War, we could slightly change it so that the routes are a little open, you know. And yeah, that's it. That is all the changes for 10.1, and we will hope to see, and we're just going to have to wait and see what Nintendo will give us next week. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you next time.